Hello everyone and welcome to the high-flying and web-spinning Comic Vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And today Dan and I are starting a very special series on the Comic Vault. We're going to get these out as often as humanly possible. We are going to be doing some commentary on on Stan Lee's Spider-Man, starting all the way back at the very, very beginning with Amazing Fantasy 15. And we're going to do these page for page. We've never done anything like this before, so the format of this is going to be, first of all, very different from our normal kind of more loose, free-form sort of dialogue. But secondly, it's going to be a little bit experimental out the gate because we've never tried this before. We don't know exactly what it's going to be like. So what we're going to do is we're going to start these with a brief synopsis, just in case it's been a while since you've read these particular issues, because we're not doing these in chunks. We're doing one issue at a time. And I don't know how far we're going to go. The plan right now is to just go as far as we can go, at least through Stan Lee, but maybe even past that.
Yeah, I mean, let's do it for as long as we can, because, I mean, this is my favorite run of in all of comics. That's why I'm really excited about doing this. But Amazing Spider-Man specifically, was really good consistently for like 20 years. So you could review it as an ongoing story and look at how Peter Parker changes over the course of those 2 decades and see everything. So that'd be really fun if we eventually got to do that. I mean, that would be like, 400 episodes.
Yeah, it's gonna take a while, and we'll shoot some of these more at a time when we can, so that we're not 65 and still doing this. But we're gonna do our best and see how far we can get. Again, this is somewhat experimental, so we're gonna see how this goes, and if we enjoy doing it this way. And things could change, but hopefully this ends up being really cool. So that's our plan right now. Let's go ahead and get right into Amazing Fantasy 15. And again, we're gonna start with a little bit of a synopsis. We'll talk just briefly about the issue itself, and then we'll go page for page. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, basically, the story is the origin of Spider-Man. This was a 12-page story in Amazing Fantasy 15. It had like I think 3 other stories in there that were all drawn by Steve Ditko as well. This was like the cover story, but this was a character that Stan Lee, the story goes, he had thought up. He was in his office and was thinking it would be cool to have a superhero that could climb up walls, and he was thinking of other names for things, and none of them sounded good, but he thought of Spider-Man. The publisher rejected the idea multiple times because he thought Spider-Man sounded like a scary thing, and eventually Stan figured, I'll just plop the story for the origin of this guy in a comic that's about to be canceled. Amazing Fantasy 15 was not doing very well in the sales, and they let him publish it in there. He eventually went to Jack Kirby with the project, and he thought that Kirby drew Spider-Man a little bit too heroic looking, and he wanted someone to make him look a little bit more meager and kind of like a normal person. So he went to Steve Ditko. Interestingly enough, we're looking at the cover right now. That's actually drawn by Jack Kirby. He drew that based on Ditko's designs for the costume and the character and stuff. And there's an unused cover you can find on the internet. And I think it was used for a variant cover for Amazing Spider-Man 600 when Slott put that out. It's basically the same cover you see here from a different angle, but drawn by Ditko. So you can find that. But all the interiors are done by Steve Ditko, and he contributed a lot to this moving forward. He basically plotted all of the stories at a certain point, and Lee just put the dialogue in as per the Marvel method. But yeah, that's kind of the history leading up to it here. I think it's all really interesting.
I think it was really smart.
I like all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it was really smart to use the Kirby cover because it sells it. In the first place, it looks really dynamic, and then you read it, you go, oh, this is what this is about, and then you're fine with a lanky Spider-Man. But to have that in the first place, the idea that the notion of a not heroic yet superhero, not heroic looking superhero, is not going to be a thing that will, visually sell a book in the first place.
That's true, yeah.
I also wanted to jump off something else you said and say that in the annals of comic history, Martin Goodman is not a person who is all that beloved now, right? Like so many things that I. That we love and that then led us into like the superhero screen onslaught and stuff like that, we would not have if it weren't for Stan Lee completely defying his boss over and over and over again.
Yeah, and Stan Lee with Spider-Man specifically, defied the rules and conventions of the comic business throughout his run. I mean, we'll eventually get to the issues where they published a story about Harry Osborn's drug addiction, and that was against the comics code, famously. So, Stan Lee was kind of a pioneer in that way, and his collaborators as well. They were an equal part in collaborating and making the stories. I don't want to give all the credit to Stan Lee because it's the Marvel method. It's very, very collaborative. But, I think the editors often get a bad rap and have sort of a thankless job. Because, there's editorial situations like with Chris Claremont on X-Men when Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief and he had Claremont change some things that eventually led to the Dark Phoenix saga happening the way it did. So, there's good and bad when it comes to that sort of stuff. Well,
the editor, of course, is there to make sure the books sell. And it sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, what sold was action. And Martin Goodman, certainly at the time, had good reason to think that no one was going to care about anything that felt like deep storytelling, anything that felt like it was about something and had anything beyond like moral platitudes and that sort of thing. And Stan Lee tried to prove to him that you can have both. And ultimately, I was talking about his defying his boss. I mean, that's what kept him in the business in the first place with Fantastic Four. If he hadn't said, "Nah, I'm going to do one my way," regardless of what he's saying, I'm thinking about leaving anyway. I don't care if I get fired because I'm going to leave anyway. We wouldn't have had the Marvel method in the first place. So you do have to credit Stan for that.
Yes, you do, of course. And I think when you think about the story that we have here, in a lot of ways, I think it's sort of you throwing a lot of the things that were popular at the time into a blender, like the sort of teenage, high school drama kind of thing. That was really popular with stuff like Archie, and
sure.
The superhero trend was coming back, so they started doing a lot of these characters. So I think Stan Lee kind of throwing those two things into a hat and coming up with something that's certainly somewhat derivative. It's not like no one had ever done high school dramas or superhero comics before.
Yeah.
But making something that felt really fresh and original at the time, for sure.
But putting them together in the way he did certainly would have subverted expectations.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Because let's go ahead and get right into it. One of the big reasons is because you're looking at what is essentially a tragedy with this story. The hero not only doesn't really win at the end, but he's not a hero yet. I mean, you get to the end and he kind of decides to use his costume for something else, but we haven't even seen him do that yet. By the end of the story, you basically have a kid that screwed up and paid for it. The end. That's the story.
Exactly. And that's why I sort of appreciated the way that the origin was done. And I'll talk about my appreciation and compare this to both of the series of films that we have with Spider-Man, because I think both of them took a lot from this story specifically, obviously, because the origin was adapted twice. But I really appreciated in the newest adaptation, The Amazing Spider-Man, where it took a lot more time for him to get to the place where he put on the costume for the reasons that you know and love Spider-Man putting it on for.
Yeah.
He was sort of a little bit more selfish and self-interested, like he is in this story initially. For a longer period of time, and you see that sort of develop much like it does in the comics over a longer period of time. Not to say that the Raimi version is invalid or I didn't like it or anything. There's things in here that I'll talk about that I really liked they did, especially visually. I mean, some of the things in the Raimi movie are like straight off the page here, which is really cool. But anyway.
Well, let's go ahead and go through each page. This is a shorter story than normal. As Dan said, this was collected with a couple of other stories. I wonder if it's ever been reprinted that way, because we always forget that Amazing Fantasy, that it was the end of a book called Amazing Adult Fantasy, and that it was they were telling a lot of monster stories and stuff like that. And Stan Lee had actually been working on that book and was trying to make it a more like complex and story driven thing too, and people just didn't care, and so it never caught on, and that's why he did this story, because Martin Goodman wouldn't let him do a Spider-Man book, so he said, "Fine, I'll just throw it at the end of it." Has that ever been? Have those stories ever been reprinted? Do you know?
I'm not sure. Every reprint of this issue that I've taken a look at doesn't have those stories in them. I've never read them. I know that one of them is called Martians Among Us, so it's just sort of a story about Martians living amongst people. It sounds like a sort of Twilight Zone episode kind of premise thing. And there was one about like a man in a mummy's tomb, and then I think there was a third one too, and Steve Ditko drew them all, as I said before. I've never taken a look at any of Ditko's non-superhero work. It'd be interesting to take a look at that kind of stuff and see what it's like.
If memory serves, the tagline that Stan Lee put on that book before it was canceled was something along the lines of "the book that doesn't insult your intelligence," or something like that. And that was pretty funny.
No, I mean, and you know, if you look at a lot of the comics coming out at the time, he wasn't wrong. Again,
absolutely.
Comparing them to the stories, the kind of stories he was writing. When you look at some of the other stuff, that's why I love these comics are so great. I mean, you kind of have to read them with a historical, through a historical lens, in that some of the dialogue is a little overwritten and kind of cheesy, but that's just kind of the way the comics are written, and you kind of have to examine the themes of the stories and see like where they fit into the time they were being written. I mean, you take a look at some of the earlier Marvel stuff that Stan Lee worked on, like Captain America, where Captain America was, punching Hitler in the face before that was popular in the United States. Like, they were saying Hitler's a bad guy when people around here kind of liked him before the war broke out, when he was the most popular German leader and was Times Man of the Year a couple times in a row. So, Marvel was the people working there were very forward-thinking and were kind of on the nose, talking about the issues of the day and what people's lives were really like in this country. And, people always talk about Marvel as, it's set in our world, and it was very much true at the beginning. I don't know if it is as much of that as it was back then and in this period, but it definitely was true at the beginning.
Well, I mean, especially after Secret Wars, because I don't know about you, Dan, but I'm pretty sure that our universe is not imploded, and that there wasn't like a giant life raft. Well, let's go ahead and get straight into it, Dan. You know what? Something that I'm going to mention when you were talking about looking at this stuff through a historical lens, is it occurred to me while I was reading this that part of the reason that you had no difficulty probably whatsoever looking at original series Star Trek when I showed it to you was that you're familiar with stuff from this period. And
that's true. The 60s is like my favorite historical time period in American history.
Yeah.
So I look at a lot of stuff from the 60s, and I love that kind of aesthetic and what people were talking about. I mean, to a degree, like, we're still talking about a lot of the things that were issues in the 60s. The problems have changed slightly, but we're still kind of stuck on a lot of the problems that they were talking about back then. So it's interesting to go back and look at this stuff, for sure. Original series Star Trek is great.
All right, page for page, here we go. So, page one, this narration box at the top speaks to what you were talking about a minute ago, Dan, where it's saying, because it's like, hey, because you like costumed heroes, luckily we in the comic bad business refer to them as long underwear characters. We're making a big deal out of superheroes are back again. And okay, we get it. Here's another one, but it's not like what you've seen before. And I think it's really funny that it starts with, oh, it's different. And of course, the big thing that even still, folks that love Spider-Man always go back to is Spider-Man's an everyman. He could be anybody. And they're making a big deal out of that right away by saying he's not this larger-than-life kind of character.
Yeah, and Spider-Man famously was also the first teenage character that wasn't the sidekick to an older character. He wasn't a protege. He was a kid just kind of figuring out how to do this all on his own. And he was kind of a loner, so he didn't work well with anyone. I mean, we'll see that when we take a look at the first issue where he tries to work with the Fantastic Four. And that's even evident from the first page here. We see him being shunned by a bunch of teenagers. You know, what his personality is and where he fits into the social order just by looking at this first panel here, which is brilliant. It's a great introduction of the character.
I also think it's surprising how much Ditko's art right here at the very beginning looks like the Archie comics of that period.
Yeah, I mean, you see, that's not Flash Thompson in the center here, but he draws a lot of the kids who shun Peter Parker with similar faces, so he kind of looks like him. But he's got the, the orange hair thing going on. So yeah, he kind of looks
the striped shirts and yeah. There's a lot of
that's Liz Allen there.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Right there with the blonde hair, I think. She's always sort of putting Peter Parker down until he gets his powers and he gets a little bit more confidence, and she gets attracted to him right when he starts going out with Betty Brant. He has to kind of push her away. He's like, leave me alone, which is always funny.
So then we meet Uncle Ben right at the beginning. Obviously is establishing the major character that's going to get killed and be the reason that Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man in the first place, but you don't know it right away. I think that if you were actually introduced to Spider-Man through this, and how many people of our generation possibly could have, but if you, but at the time, if you're reading this, I don't think that this is like a standard formula thing yet. I don't think that you would know that he's gonna die when you see him on that first page. I think that becomes a shock at the end, especially because of the admittedly, I think, somewhat convenient nature of dude Peter Parker met one time, a few days later goes to his house and kills his uncle. You never would have seen it coming, partly because Stan Lee, in my opinion, cheating a little bit with that. How would you ever see it coming? What are the odds? But it is kind of neat that it would throw you for a loop, because again, when it says in that first page, it's a little different. Part of it is different is the hero doesn't win right away because he's not a hero yet.
Yeah, exactly, and I think one of the things that Brian Michael Bendis talked about a lot when he redid the origin for Ultimate Spider-Man was he wanted to spend a little bit more time with Uncle Ben so you could get to know him as a character. When he died, the death was a little bit more resonant emotionally. But I think, given how short the story is here, I think it's effective enough in that you see the reason why Peter Parker is sort of all out for himself, at least initially when he gets the powers, because there's only two people in the world that have ever been nice to this guy before. He doesn't need his real parents, for no reason we're not even told here, kind of abandoned him. We don't really know where they are. He lives with his aunt and uncle, and they're the only two people who have ever cared for him. Like, he's shunned by everybody else. So it would make some sort of sense that he would be a guy that's like, I don't need anyone else. I'm just going to look out for myself and my family. And, that's kind of the attitude that's encouraged in our society to a large degree. Like, you kind of, you make a living for yourself, and it's not really your obligation to necessarily help anyone else unless it's, you have some sort of disposable income, right? Like, you can be rich and donate to charity and stuff like that, but that's like the American dream is, getting a white picket fence, some kids in a house, So
yeah, and you cut yourself off like that, and it's very easy to be isolated and pay no attention to the world outside. We'll see a little bit later, and of course we'll talk about this when we get to it, that Peter Parker has somewhat of a skewed view of the world, and when you get to toward the end of this, and he says, everyone else can go hang for all I care. And I'm just going to take care of me and my own. I think that's really interesting because Peter Parker's origin, eventually becomes a superhero, but at first it's kind of the same as a lot of, I thought of this reading it, of his B and C list supervillains, right? I mean, like, he very easily, without a different upbringing or without the extreme, the magnitude of what he personally lost, could have very easily gone in, a more bad guy kind of direction.
That's why I think Spider-Man has, in my opinion, he has the best rogues gallery in comics. I know a lot of people would argue that Batman is the superior one, and they have a point. But
the superior Batman.
I really like Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery because a lot of the characters parallel the origin in a lot of significant ways. One other thing I want to talk about, too, before we get off the topic of Uncle Ben and Aunt May here.
And wheat cakes!
Wheat cakes, Aunt May's signature dish. She will cook them for Peter many, many times throughout the history of Spider-Man, and everyone always calls back to that panel.
Is that a joke, or is it like she thinks it's his favorite, or is it really his favorite?
He likes them, but it's just funny because she calls them wheat cakes, I think. When everyone else calls them flapjacks or pancakes, I go with pancakes.
Yeah, because the first time I ever read that, I had to look really close to the panel to realize that she was actually holding a certain... What the heck is wheat cake? Like, I was imagining rice cakes, but wheat?
Yeah.
And I was like, why would that be anyone's favorite anything? And then, pancakes.
I suppose it's just kind of an outdated term now. I mean, I really don't know if this was a popular thing to call pancakes in the 60s, but it's interesting. But the drawing here, when she's handing him the wheat cakes, Rosemary Harris and Martin Sheen are the spitting image of those two characters.
Absolutely, yeah.
Such good casting in both film series, respectively, for those two characters. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I think you're right. And obviously they were looking more at Ultimate when they cast him again for Amazing.
Yeah, but I think, Uncle Ben looks significantly different in Ultimate. He's got like a ponytail and stuff, so he doesn't look anything like the same character.
Well then they were just
looking at him.
They were looking at it in that they cast him slightly younger. That's all I meant.
Okay.
No, that's true. I forgot he had a ponytail. I haven't read those early ones.
Yeah, he's really skinny in that too, and he has glasses. So we're looking at Peter in high school here. He's really smart, and he doesn't have any luck with the girls because he doesn't play sports. He's not a jock. He doesn't go to the gym and work out and stuff. He's an intellectual, and this is something nerd culture is kind of popular now, but intellectualism, especially when you're young, is kind of looked down upon still by a lot of people in our society. So I think that's a kind of relatable thing, at least for people that are, have a passion for some sort of intellectual pursuit, like whether it be science or math or English, whatever your passion may be. If it's in academics, you can kind of relate to this guy in that, if you're the guy that answers all the questions in class, you're the teacher's pet, nobody likes you, that sort of thing. Yeah,
and I think that is still very relatable. I think the whole, you're good at science, so no one likes you thing, maybe not so much, but the idea of seeming smarter than everyone else and being a know-it-all, I think is as big of a problem or even bigger than it was at the time. Because we have this kind of often self-esteem thing in this culture where you can't do anything that makes other people feel insignificant or lesser or something, and that's definitely a problem.
And the irony of all these, I mean, we'll get to know these characters a lot better later on, but the irony of all of these characters is they have to put Peter Parker down because they're insecure about their own personalities and their intellectual pursuits. I mean, with Flash Thompson, it's the most direct parallel, obviously, because we learn stuff about him and his upbringing and his father and stuff later on. But I mean, there's so much that you can kind of draw on from, the characters here, and it's such a short story that I think writers since have mined a lot of greatness out of it. Like, Flash Thompson is kind of a two-dimensional, mustache-twirling version of a supervillain, but a high school bully. Like, he's the closest thing to that at this point, because we don't have a villain other than the burglar in here. He's kind of the main antagonist, at least in Peter's personal life.
Right.
But eventually we turn this guy into a well-rounded three-dimensional character, because Peter Parker was that way, and there has to be a reason why Flash feels insecure towards him.
I also like establishing the science thing right on the second page, because that's the big thing that he brings to the table when he becomes a superhero and gets his powers. So it's not just he's cool because he has these spider powers. There's a number of personality traits and skills that he brings to the table that makes him a fully fleshed out character as we move forward. He's not just a dude that can do a thing because he got bit by a spider.
Yeah, and this is kind of classic Silver Age Marvel. Science is somehow involved in the origin of almost every hero that Stan Lee and his
importantly, always radiation.
Yeah, it's radiation, something to do with science or particles. The subatomic particles, I think, are involved in what's being done on the spider here, so it's kind of similar to what Ant-Man went through. All of that stuff is, really related. Stanley had a fascination with science, at least to the degree that he understood it, because he admits often that he was not a scientist, and a lot of the stuff he used was pseudoscience. And you didn't really understand all the concepts.
And I love how he skips past stuff. Yeah, it's really functional and just whatever he wants to do. I love how this guy says, now for a demonstration of how we can control radioactive rays here in the laboratory, and we just skip over that after that. You know what I mean? It's like we won't actually know how exactly that works or what exactly they're even trying to accomplish there. They just have radiation and spiders go.
Yeah, and importantly, I don't think you need to, and Stanley is kind of, one of the things he always says is you need to keep the attention of the reader, and he often does that through, dynamic action and interesting dialogue. If this is a story designed for, teenagers or, preteens or something like that, you're not going to want to have, 20 pages dedicated to explaining how atomic science works,
No, of course. Yeah. We don't want it to be Moby Dick or anything.
Exactly.
I really love this line in the narration box where Stanley's talking about the spider, and he says, a spider whom fate has given a starring, if brief, role to play in the drama we call life. That's great, because that spider has been reinterpreted as many different times as the character himself. I think that's really funny. It's always a spider. There's obviously been a lot of different sorts of origins now, and sometimes it's different colors, and sometimes it's it's because of Norman Osborn, and sometimes it's not. It's just all these different ways to do it. And I just think it's really funny that it says that, and then you watch different variations. You're like, wow, actually that spider has had a much less brief role than Stanley would have thought, because we see it over and over again.
That's true. I mean, everyone kind of goes back to the story, and that's a kind of classic Stan Lee narration there, where it's kind of a mundane moment, like a spider crawling down onto a guy's hand and biting him, but he has such a bombastic narration of what's going on that it seems more exciting than it actually is.
And that's a lot of fun. I also like that he uses the word fate there, because and I don't want to read too much into that, because obviously you can just see it as fate in the sense that here's a thing that happens and it doesn't necessarily take away from free will. I don't mean that, because nobody knew what was going to happen, but on the other hand, you can get away with a little bit more when you talk about stuff like that, because it's really easy to look at the origin of Spider-Man and say that in a way that not to get into totems and stuff, but in a way, look at it the universe punished him. It was karma, so that he could go on a path. You know what I mean? There is that perhaps in there or not, vague enough that you can kind of get away with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how Peter Parker getting bit by the spider here. He just kind of looks so weak on the outside. These people are just making fun of him when he leaves the room. They're like, too bad, he must have a weak stomach and all that sort of thing. You really feel bad for the guy, because nobody will give him a chance,
Yeah, even elderly people, those aren't even kids.
And those are people that are there for the same reason that he was. These are people that are interested in science, and you think they'd be like, oh, a young man interested in science, I would have, killed to meet a person in high school that was like that. But they're like, oh, no,
Yeah, those people are... There's a lot of two-dimensional jerk faces in this comic. You're like, dude, the kid looks lightheaded and like he needs some sugar. Hand him a candy bar or something, dude. There at the bottom of the page is that panel you always like to talk about ever since we saw the 1978 live-action TV pilot with the car that's speeding toward him, and he jumps on a wall and sticks to it, and then in the TV show it's moving 6 miles an hour.
Yes. See, I'm looking at a version of a book that I have, and the one they're looking at on the screen here, the coloring's a bit different.
Oh, really?
But I think mine is a restoration of the original coloring. I don't know which one is correct, but in that panel on the bottom page there, I always thought it was cool, and I think this is the correct one because the Raimi movie directly references this part of the panel. Spider-Man's fingertips are highlighted, and he's kind of staring at them. And you get that visually in the first Raimi movie when he kind of looks at his thumb and you see the little spider hairs pop out of his hand. That's kind of a reference to the artistic choice there when Ditko has Peter Parker staring at his hands and he's got these like glowing fingertips that signify the fact that he can climb walls and stuff now.
On the can I ask you this? On the version you're looking at, does he have one hand over the narration box?
Oh, in the far right panel there?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because I think that's hilarious because it doesn't actually, because of the way that's drawn, and I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but it doesn't look like he's sticking on walls and has superpowers. It looks like there's just a narration box there. He leapt up real hard. He grabbed on to both sides of the narration box. I mean, as long as you could jump that high, any of us could do that. You know, you just grab on the side of the narration box. Anyway, I think that's really funny. And it starts looking very Winnie the Pooh at that point, where like you're interacting with the words in the panel. And
yeah, and you know, the people that are about to run him over with the car, they're not concerned about his safety at all either. They call him an egghead.
Like, oh man, that guy's an idiot. If we'd hit him and he went careening over the top of our car, that's on him.
Yeah. So, you know, this is kind of a classic scene where Spider-Man's discovering his powers, climbing up the building and stuff. You know,
fly.
Yeah,
Shazam!
He doesn't have his organic web shooters like he does in that movie here, but he's kind of crawling on clotheslines and cables and stuff. So that's pretty cool. Well,
and I think it's fun because if you're a kid reading this, I think it's very easy to put yourself in his shoes. And again, having some historical perspective and looking back on it, we already were. Let's not pretend like we weren't doing origins for superheroes back then. There was always, oftentimes, superheroes kind of did come from some sort of a place. But this is an unlikely hero. This is a guy that it doesn't seem like the sort of person you would give superpowers. So suddenly, and I'm not saying that we relate to him when we're kids because he's a kid too. Like imaginations often work differently that way. You can relate to someone that's not your age because you want to live up to somebody, and when you're a kid, you want to be an adult. On the other hand, when you're a teenager, or even a smaller kid, and I think this probably resonates even more with little kids reading this who are looking forward to being a teenager. You're thinking, oh cool, he's like me. He's just a nothing kid. He's got no money. Nobody likes him. I was like, you know, maybe people like you more than you know. But I'm just saying, like, a lot of things that you could potentially relate to. And so all of a sudden, you got this kid that's going to become a superhero, and then he becomes even more relatable in that he makes a lot of mistakes. And like we'll talk about this in a minute, but he verges on unsympathetic right before his right. I mean, like he's not a I would go as far as to say that Peter Parker's not really even a good person yet. But he's also, you know, a kid that hasn't found himself yet. You know.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think it was sort of misplaced. A lot of people said that they didn't like the Amazing Spider-Man's portrayal of Peter Parker in the origin because they didn't find him to be a sympathetic character. And
that's kind of the point.
I was like, well, that's kind of the point. Especially if you go back and read this original story, that's exactly what he's like. And that's why I liked that movie so much. One thing I wanted to mention before we move on, too, was I love the panel that we're looking up here on the far right, the second column, where Ditko sort of draws the chest of the costume with Peter Parker in the distance. There's a lot of really cool artistic stuff done by Ditko in this. And we'll see more of his artistic flair later on, like when we have the Spider-Man face drawn in the sky at the end of every issue, which is a really cool artistic touch. But Ditko just puts on a masterclass in artistry in this issue and all of his Amazing Spider-Man stuff. It's so good.
Well, I like some of it I think you could kind of call foreshadowing, and a lot of it is also there, I think, to stylistically remind us that we're looking at a superhero book. It just doesn't look like a superhero book yet because we have to get there. So so it's like Peter Parker almost looking at or being followed by a reflection of what his future's going to be.
And that's set up on the very first page when we see that shadow of Spider-Man when he's being shunned by those kids. It's a kind of thematic thing that follows throughout. It's awesome.
So obviously the Raimi movie, the first one, did the wrestler thing and got really close to what it was. I actually like some things there even better than this. I like that there he actually went with the spider motif in the first place. It makes a lot of sense. I think it's cool. Here it's just really generic. He just puts on a bag over his head and goes and fights. But I have to mention this because I always think it's really funny. I admittedly spent too long on it in my rewind all those years ago when I did that movie. When I was complaining about the whole the whole thing with the newspaper article, and it was like you get $2,000, and then he was only in the ring for 2 minutes, so the guy gives him $100, and that's really bizarre. And here it's $100 in the first place. I just wanted to mention that because that was kind of funny that he gets the amount of money that he gets in the comic in the movie, but he gets gypped there, and that's the whole reason that he ends up not stopping the burglar, because he's got a beef with that guy.
Yeah, it's really funny how they went back and referenced that. It's really cool that they thought to add little touches like that, for sure. I just want to
mention that, because I think it's amusing. So there he is with that mask. Once again, I like that it is all really super makeshift.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the kind of thing where it would make sense that a kid wouldn't have any idea to make a costume like that initially, but then, again, there's the problem of he kind of just makes it in his room a few panels after this.
I like that... Yeah, but at least it doesn't look like a Hollywood-level movie costume. I mean,
That's true. You know... It looks a little bit more makeshift in this, at least in the way that Ditko draws it.
That helps a lot. I like that Crusher is wearing Hulk pants.
Yes.
I think that's kind of funny. And so then, of course, this guy comes in at the bottom and is looking to make Spider-Man famous.
Yes, and that's something that I would imagine would appeal to a kid that nobody likes. Money and adoration, like that's what Peter Parker's been looking for his entire life, is success and adoration from somebody other than his aunt and uncle.
I think we're really sorry.
The ironic thing being when he takes that offer and he lets it go to his head, he loses one of the people that really cares about him in the first place, which is really sad.
I think that we're again subverting expectations and kind of turning some Golden Age stuff on its head. When you would get an origin story in a Golden Age comic, it would not be unusual to get 6 pages in and all this and the character's already in costume. We got to get that stuff out of the way. As I've said a lot in Rewind, a lot of the time origins really should be there just to get the ball rolling, unless there's really a story there. If an origin story is simply dude falls in a vat of acid, gets his powers, and then he starts doing things and learning stuff, and there's no character arc there at all to get him to a place, then don't spend any time on it. What I like here is that he's already in costume, and he's learned nothing, and he's not a hero yet. I think that's really cool. We're halfway into this issue, and again, it's very short, and he's already wearing his costume, and he's doing it for all the wrong reasons, or at least, well, actually, I don't even want to say that. I don't think he's really done anything wrong yet.
The thing with a lot of Golden Age comics is that the character that gets the powers, the fact that they're a selfless, upstanding, moral human being is kind of a given. Of course, exactly. They're a good guy. They have superpowers, and their name is on the front of this book.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the story is.
And it makes sense because they're supposed to be role models. We want kids to be able to live up to them. But it's sort of like making sure that violence has consequences. Can't kids live up more to a character that feels like a real person in that they used to make certain mistakes, now they've learned from them? And so what makes them a good role model is that you saw them make mistakes, and they're trying to not do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think, like you said, Peter Parker has done anything particularly bad. Like, he hasn't made bad choices. He's just made wrong choices in that he's not motivated in the correct way, in the way that he does things. Intent does matter when you do things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of him as a character that's about to become a superhero, I mean, obviously, once he's given the opportunity to do the right thing in a situation, he should have stopped that guy. But the question I have for you, Dan, is it a problem that he's trying to use his powers for selfish things when he's just trying to help his family out and they're poor and all of that? I mean, obviously, I love that facial expression in that center panel where he looks like, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the panel, but he's already looking like he's getting a little greedy about it. You know what I mean? He's like, and he's getting. I mean, obviously, the main reason that he doesn't stop the burglar is because he's full of himself now. He's too big for his britches. That's beneath me. I don't need to do that. But like, if he were to have used his powers. I mean, we recently watched, Dan, that Wonder Woman pilot, and Wonder Woman did this. She needed some cash, and then she immediately started doing good things with her powers. If Spider-Man had gone to the wrestling thing, gotten the money, allowed himself to become a star, and then whenever a bad thing happens that he can stop, he stopped it, I think we'd still see him as a hero.
Yeah, that's true, I suppose. But I think the thing is, like, you have to ask the question, like, if he didn't have such a great personal loss, would he have thought to do those good things?
Precisely. No, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing you were mentioning about him sort of like getting a little greedy about it, I think it's realistic too, because how many child stars have we seen who seem like, really sweet individuals, and then the fame and the money kind of goes to their heads and their lives kind of go off track. It's really unfortunate to kind of watch all of that unfold in the media circus that it is today. But, that happens to a lot of people. When you give a lot of fame and fortune to an impressionable young person, they don't always use it the right way.
And again, importantly, this is an extreme. Obviously, Peter Parker is in some ways an everyman, but I think it's important to note that his situation is somewhat extreme in the sense that, as you said, with his parents missing, and he's raised by his aunt and uncle, and nobody seems to like him. What happens when all of a sudden you get all of this, where you get fame and fortune, and you get all this attention, when yesterday everybody hated you?
Yeah, exactly. The adoration that he's been looking for his whole life, he just got it in a matter of hours. It's really interesting.
I like this. My costume is thin enough to wear unseen under my street clothes.
Yeah, and when you look at the costume, it looks kind of loose-fitting. Like, we always think about Spider-Man with the, barrel-chested, like, muscles flexing. Like, after Romita got a hold of Spider-Man and started drawing him that way, that's kind of what everyone has drawn him as since. But he's, especially when we get to the next page, his limbs look really spindly, and he looks gawky and awkward, and the costume doesn't look like it fits him correctly. You can't see any of his muscles. It looks like it's obviously made of a spandex-type material, but it looks like it's loose enough that you can't see any muscle definition that he has.
I always thought it'd be cool if we just had a progression toward it where the more confident and self-assured Spider-Man is, the more muscular he gets. I always thought that would be... But then the problem with that, of course, is that Spider-Man is a character that, he tries not to make the same mistakes all the time, but he also is a character that everything always goes wrong for him, and he's a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of character. So he has so many times that he gets insecure again because despite his best intentions, everything goes wrong anyway. And then what do you do with the muscular thing there? Because you can't have Spider-Man constantly say, I'm not going to be Spider-Man anymore, put his costume away, and then suddenly he's lanky again, just to fit that motif. So maybe that wouldn't work, but...
Yeah, and I think they tried to do something similar to that in the second Spider-Man movie, where he wasn't as confident, he just lost his powers. It wasn't like just his strength in the muscular thing. That was a little weird.
Which works away stylistically in a comic book in a way that it doesn't as a plot point in a movie, where it's like, okay, it's a metaphor, but what's the story here, That was my problem. That was always my problem with it. Also, before we move on from this page, could we please get something akin to the armpit webbing in the next incarnation? Could we finally just add that?
That would be really cool. There's a lot of rumors going around that the eyes on the costume that Marvel's going to be using, the eyes will change and shrink depending on what his mood is, like it does in the comics. When he squints, the eyes get smaller.
Whoa.
Which would be really cool. Like, it's rumored right now, but apparently there's some sort of mechanical device that shrinks the eyes down or makes them wide when he has to express his face, which I think is a cool idea.
That is a cool idea. Well, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the Patrick Warburton Tickenton eye.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Where he'd get excited, or he'd be like uncertain or suspicious. So now we go on to part 2 because we got 12 pages. We got to split them into 2 parts. But at least it's 6 and 6.
Yeah, they do that a lot with the Silver Age Marvel stuff, where they'll split up the stories into part 1 and part 2 for whatever reason, as if you could only read the 6 pages of the story in one sitting, and you had to pick up at part 2 at some point. But you know, it's funny, especially when you get to the first issue of Amazing Spider-Man. They do that with a story where J. Jonah Jameson's son is in like a space rocket, and Spider-Man's trying to save him. But yeah, this is the panel I was talking about, where you look at the way Spider-Man's drawn, and he doesn't look muscular at all. His leg is bending in a really strange way there. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool.
The more I'm looking at this, now Spider-Man is becoming a TV star and he's doing stuff in front of the cameras. I find myself wondering if, and I don't mean to be preoccupied by this, but we were talking about the Wonder Woman pilot earlier. The more I'm looking at this, the more I'm wondering if they weren't influenced by this.
I wouldn't be surprised
with that pilot. It's just it's so similar in her deciding to go in front of people and stuff. Obviously important change to a lot of well, maybe not a lot of different versions, but but especially the Raimi version. Everything happens in one night. In that he goes to the wrestling place, and then he leaves and then he goes in the hall of the wrestling place, and that's where the burglar is, and the burglar kills his uncle in that night. In Amazing, we get rid of the burglar thing, but it still all happens in the one night. Here it's stretched out and by over several days. And one thing I always forget that I have to be reminded by whenever I come back to this issue is that in the comics, it's not until he goes to this TV studio.
Yeah, exactly, and it makes a little bit more sense because his selfish behavior is kind of vindicated over a period of time.
There's a steady build. It's not one evening.
It's validated by people. Like he treats people like garbage, and he gets ahead in the world. And he figures, well, if people are treating me, with all this adoration, giving me money, and I can act like this, well, why shouldn't I? That's the acceptable way to behave in this environment, in this world. It makes sense why he would be that kind of person.
Well, the whole point is responsibility, and what is responsibility but realizing that actions have consequences. This is a guy that thinks that he is immortal now. He gets all these powers and nothing can stop him. Everything's going to be okay now.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's where the kind of lack of confidence sometimes comes from with this character when you talk about later stories.
Yeah.
He's a guy that had all the confidence in the world and was torn down in a really horrific and mentally scarring event. It would be kind of difficult to become that confident ever again.
Well, one of the things I love about one of the things I love about this character is that the lesson is you got these powers, thought they'd be an easy fix, and they made your life 6,000 times more complicated. So the thing that made you a better person is also the thing that makes your life 1,000 times harder than it was before. So you learned a really important lesson. If only you could have learned it before you had powers, or just after you had them.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, something you really cared about had to be taken away from you. But no, being Spider-Man sucks.
Yes, it does. And more so than I think a lot of the other Marvel characters before him. I mean, there weren't a whole lot of them. The Hulk, his life was kind of awful too, but the Fantastic Four, their life is complicated, but the public adores them.
Yeah.
They're really good with PR. They have a lot of fun in their space adventures and stuff like that.
They're also in debt constantly.
Yeah, that's true. And they have marital issues. They're Reed and Sue. There's family, friction and things like that.
Yeah, and you got a guy that's a rock creature, and he doesn't want to be a rock creature.
That's true, yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, so they're again, Stan Lee's creating people that more or less seem like real people with flaws and problems and things. But would you rather be Reed Richards or Spider-Man?
I'd rather be Reed Richards.
I'd rather be Reed Richards. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else about this page we need to talk about?
I don't think so. I just love the shocked faces on the far left there. They look really surprised.
So here's that iconic moment.
Yes, it is, and there's sort of no reason for Spider-Man acting this way other than behaving like everyone else in the issue that we've seen, that he's interacted with. He just behaves like everyone else that isn't Aunt May and Uncle Ben. In this situation, he's just sort of a individual that doesn't care about anyone else's problems or strifes or anything like that. and he lets a burglar go.
I think I actually like it slightly better in the Raimi movie because he's being vindictive against another person that feels like wronged him, and it's because he's built up this confidence, and now it's like this false confidence, and he's lost any humility he had, and so I that actually improved on this a little bit.
I think it works just as well here. I mean,
okay.
I think if you're going to,
I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that's the thing they added that I kind of like.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, like you said, if you do it in the one night thing, I think that you definitely need that.
Oh, good point. Yeah. Because
he's been interacting with all these people that have been putting him down and been really selfish throughout the whole issue, and he's just acting like everyone else around him. So I think it works well enough if you are watching all the other people that are successful that he's interacted with. Like, in every situation, in the science fair where there's all these successful scientists, the kids at school that are well-liked, they're all acting like Spider-Man acts in this situation. And now that he's got some sort of leverage on other people, he figures, well, I guess that's the way that successful people behave, people that are accepted in social situations.
Yeah, and I hated being like that, or people doing that to me, but then now I'm justified because I've become one of these people. I'm better than I was. So when I see a nerd like that, I'm going to do that to them because I deserve to be that way.
It was a lack of confidence in his place in the social order. Like, if this Peter Parker, if he never learned the lesson, I think, would go to school and put down people that might have been his friends, nerds and stuff like that.
I think this version, one thing I do like about stretching out like this is that and it's funny that I say that because we're stretching it over time, but it's still 12 pages. It's fun. I like that it kind of exacerbates the tragic nature of this story, and is more of a blow to the stomach when he's gonna keep ramping up his cockiness after he's already done the thing that's gonna lead to or not, because importantly, of course, he's not really responsible for Uncle Ben's death. The point is, you should always do the right thing. You know what I mean? He's gonna hold himself responsible, and I think I would too. You know what I mean? But he didn't kill him. He just didn't stop the guy that eventually is going to. And those two events don't even seem remotely related. So the point is, always do the right thing because you never know.
Yeah, and I like that it's kept ambiguous in that way here. There have been subsequent versions of the origin, retellings of it. Like John Byrne did a version called Spider-Man Chapter 1 that immensely complicates the situation with the burglar, where the burglar knew Uncle Ben, and the burglar was spying on their house and things like that.
What?
And it's way overcomplicated, and it kind of ruins the sort of message of the story in trying to make sense out of the burglar coincidence and make Peter Parker a little bit more directly responsible for the death and things like that. I like that it's a little bit more ambiguous as to. And
then Spider-Man 3 went off
and did just a random dude.
Then Spider-Man 3 went off and did the same thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I can kind of see falling into the trap of being tempted to do that because it does seem a little convenient, but then I could see the case being made that that's sort of somewhat the point that and I think Stanley could have it's only 12 pages, potentially maybe even after this you could make it a little bit more clear that you're making a point out of the fact that it is a coincidence. But I can see the case being made that as I said, the whole point is he didn't stop this guy. He's not really responsible for the fact that the guy killed Uncle Ben, but anything is possible and there are consequences. And again, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's karma or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if Stanley wanted to do something like that, he easily could have brought that burglar back and made him a supervillain, gave him a supervillain origin and explained, some of the events surrounding what happened after he got into the elevator. And maybe Peter Parker is a little bit more directly responsible in some way. But he never did that.
Something else I just thought of is
sure.
I like that Peter Parker immediately gets a present from Aunt May and Uncle Ben immediately after he's just done this thing that he doesn't realize how terrible it is.
Even his family's validating him for his behavior.
It's almost like he's being rewarded for it in his own mind, and not for specifically that, but for the way he's behaving. Like, everything's going right now. Look how great I am. I think that's great. It's like, look, congratulations, here's a reward, and a few days later, your uncle gets killed because of this guy you could have stopped.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So we've got some newspapers. None of them are the Daily Bugle yet.
Yeah, J. Jonah Jameson and the Daily Bugle are introduced in the first issue of Amazing. We get J. Jonah, his son, and that's when he first starts railing against Spider-Man because, interestingly enough, J. Jonah Jameson hates Spider-Man as a result of his showboating, being a wrestler. He thinks he's a guy that's just trying to get money and adoration and newspaper headlines, which was kind of true when Spider-Man started.
And I love that, yeah. You need that stuff in order to understand why J. Jonah Jameson hates him in the first place. Now, when you go years and years and years and years, and clearly this guy keeps putting his life on the line, J. Jonah Jameson starts to make less and less and less sense. But when it gets hilarious, he's just this like kind of bigoted kook. And I just watched the episode of Amazing Spider-Man the other day where he thinks Mysterio is a hero over Spider-Man, and it's the funniest.
The issues too.
Oh, really? I can't wait to get there. And I should mention too that part of the reason we're doing this is because I've never read all of these. I haven't been able to get my hands on some of these early issues. Like over the years, I just have never read them. And so it's gonna be fun to finally get to see some of the stuff that I know about, having read things about them, but I've never actually experienced, or some of them in years and years.
It's gonna be really fun looking at a lot of because pretty much all of the movies and the television shows take stuff from this, obviously, but when we get to stuff like the Dr. Octopus stuff and the Master Planner story, that's all over Spider-Man 2. So I know you love that movie as much as I do, and it's going to be cool to show you all the little references and stuff.
I can't wait. But damn, that idea that Jameson hates him for what he was, I think is really cool. Motivation. Tell me if I'm reading too far into this. I probably am. I love the giant spider head at the top of the page, and the giant Spider-Man with Spider-Man head with the spider behind it. And again, we were talking about the stylistic nature of what Ditko's doing with that stuff, but I think it might be there as a somewhat obvious visual symbol of he's got a big ego. He's got a big head right now.
True. I think you might be onto something there. And this actually starts a ongoing trend in Spider-Man comics. Floating heads are a thing.
Yeah.
Spider-Man. There's tons of covers and panels of Spider-Man sort of just considering all of the people in his life and what they mean to him and how he might be letting them down for whatever reason, whatever the situation might be in the story. And there's just floating heads all around him. So this is the first floating head in Spider-Man canon.
I think that's appropriate because Stan Lee's trying so hard to make this stuff character-driven, and so the whole point is who these people are and how they change and stuff, and so we're focused on their faces.
Exactly.
That's maybe kind of important. And so now, that middle panel, a lot of the most iconic panels in this seem to be right in the middle, and that's one that you see come up over and over and over again in documentaries and stuff like that. The very expressive face that Ditko drew for Peter Parker finding out for the first time that Uncle Ben got killed, and I like that he immediately goes to a revenge place. Until he finds out that he's responsible, Spider-Man is on the path to become a villain, probably a D-list kind of villain. And I would submit, Dan, that if it hadn't been the burglar that it was, he probably does not become a superhero and probably remains in costume and ends up on kind of a vengeance sort of path.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, you look at the panel the set of panels you were just talking about, and it's obvious that just from the way Ditko is drawing the expressions on his face and the way that he's holding himself physically, that he has sort of an aggressive posture. Look, it looks like he's grabbing the cop by the collar there.
Yeah. In
disbelief and anger that Uncle Ben is dead. Peter Parker's got this kind of unrequited rage in him for being such a social outcast. And, he's a damaged character even before this happens to him.
Yeah, that's really important. So we are spending a lot of time on 12 pages, but this is, of course, the origin is important.
It's fantastic, because this is one of the best Spider-Man stories, the first one.
So, anyway, just so folks know, we kind of knew this was going to take a while, because
I have a lot to say about this because this is my favorite run in all of comics. Maybe we won't have as much to say moving forward on some of the issues.
I'm expecting that when we get to like 22, 23, it's not going to be an hour long for every issue, but I should never ever say that. I should never say that.
But the beauty of these comic book commentaries is we control the pace. It's not like a movie commentary.
Yeah.
Where, the director is, having things happen. We're talking over things. We have to backtrack. We can just spend as much time as we want.
It's the beauty of the medium, too. And isn't it kind of fun? Like, we've never done anything like this before. Isn't it kind of fun to, like, get to look at specifically the panels together and kind of read through it again?
Really
and
fun, yeah.
Anyway, so now he goes up against the burglar, and we get through a whole page where he's chasing him down, and he still doesn't know who it is yet. So we're building that suspense for the reader, and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal because it's only over a couple pages. But keep in mind that we're using that real estate out of a 12-page issue. So Ditko is, and I would probably say that you have to give Ditko more credit for this. That he's slowing things down a little bit to build that tension.
He is, and when you see the burglar there, this works much better in a comic book in a way that it didn't necessarily work when we got the Raimi adaptation, where Spider-Man doesn't know what the guy's face is because it's in silhouette the whole time until we get that reveal and it's the guy that he didn't stop. Like, it's very obvious that it's the burglar that he didn't stop in the movie because you recognize the actor's face.
And also because he just saw him like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
if they did that, if in the movie they'd done it the same way they did in this, where it was like a few days or a couple of weeks or something, you could still maybe get away with that because he only saw him for a split second.
That's true, yeah.
But also, there's a suspension of disbelief thing that you have to do in movies sometimes, and I think a lot of the time it's difficult to communicate, where things are lit a certain way so the audience can tell what the world we're looking at, but the illusion, the idea is supposed to be that the characters in the scene are looking at almost pitch black darkness. We get this a lot, where you'll have characters that are like stumbling around a room, and you're like, well, I can see everything in the room. Why are you stumbling around like that? It's like, well, because you, the viewer, need to be able to see what you're looking at. Otherwise, you can't tell what you're looking at.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Anyway.
But yeah, Ditko's drawn all this action pretty well. I love this streak of Spider-Man coming off the wall and stuff like that. It's very dynamic. Kirby often gets the adage applied to him that he's, the really good at action and stuff like that, and he is. But I think Ditko is a little bit underrated when it comes to action stuff. I think he does really, really good action. I think he's a little bit better at the smaller personal stuff for sure. Kirby's a little bit more better at the action, but I think Ditko does a really good job, especially once the book starts to hit his stride and you get a concrete visual identity for this book.
He's got some cinematic angles here, especially with the burglar looking up at Spider-Man. I like that panel is a little bit bigger. We've been looking at mostly your standard kind of 9-panel thing, and I think he starts to get away from that and starts mixing it up a little bit because now we're in action. So you get used to the 9-panel thing, and I think that your brain subconsciously starts to like ramp up and go, okay, now I'm in action. You get more excited just because we're mixing it up and making it look different, and so there's a lot of care put into that. This page also is important because it's making a really good case for we can do action that's served by story. It doesn't have to all be action, but look, we still have some action, and obviously because this is an origin story and he's not even in the costume for half of it. It's after this, Spider-Man is really action-driven. I mean, like, you have talkie, and it can be a really talky book, but I mean, like, when I think of books when I was a kid that I read that had characters in costume most of the time, it was Spider-Man. I mean...
Oh, yeah, exactly. Spider-Man is action-driven in some ways, in that, the thing that's the most important to me, even more so than the action, is the small and personal stuff. But
of course.
A good Spider-Man comic will balance those two things really well, which is awesome. But one of the things I wanted to mention about Steve Ditko, since we were on the topic of him, this is a character that I think, if you know a little bit about Steve Ditko's personality and what kind of guy he was, there's a lot of Steve Ditko in the characterization of Peter Parker in this origin here.
That's a good point.
Steve Ditko famously is a hermit. Like, he doesn't like to talk to people. There's only ever been like 3 photographs of him that exist. He was very shy, and he was kind of.
I think there's only like one known audio recording of his voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something.
And he was a guy that was a believer in Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, which is a very conservative American philosophy, which is all about sort of the merits of individualism and how helping people isn't good for them. You shouldn't go out of your way to help people because that makes them weak and they become dependent on whatever it is, whether it's a government level or whatever. People should kind of fend for themselves, and the lesson of this story is that's not always the case, and Peter Parker sort of has that worldview at the beginning. And I think it's interesting to think about, because a lot of people say especially later on, I think Stan Lee finds a voice for this character, and he kind of makes it his own. But Spider-Man's kind of a different thing, and initially here, he's not as the quippy, jokey kind of guy here. This isn't a Spider-Man that's cracking jokes all over the place and has the Stan Lee sense of humor. He's got Steve Ditko's personality, which is really interesting, I think.
So when he grabs the burglar, that's kind of a callback to that panel when he grabbed the cop.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
That's the thing I just now noticed, and that was kind of cool. I would, if folks haven't seen it, I would recommend the documentary Searching for Steve Ditko. I don't know if you've seen it, Dan.
Yeah, I love that documentary.
But it's quite brilliant, and it's really interesting that because I've never seen a documentary about a person that is still alive that refuses to be interviewed, and it's really cool to see the lengths that guy goes through, and how the filmmaker and how passionate he is about Steve Ditko, and I feel like you probably learn about as much as you possibly could about that guy watching that movie.
That's a really good movie. Most of my knowledge of Steve Ditko comes from that and like other stuff that I've read after watching that kind of piqued my interest in the man. Because I always liked his art on Spider-Man, but I was always sort of more of a Romita person. I liked John Romita's style a little bit more, and I still love John Romita on the book once he takes over with the Green Goblin story, where we finally figure out Norman's identity and that's revealed. But I've over the years come to appreciate Ditko's artwork much more, and I like him just about as much as Romita, if not a little bit more now, just because of the way that he does drama and stuff like that, and he's just an interesting person.
So, I think it's important to mention, probably because I and a lot of people have always complained that Spider-Man cries a little bit too much in the Raimi movies, and sometimes I get flack for that when people will point back to this and say, but he cried in his first issue! And I say, yeah, because his uncle died, and he... Sorry, what?
He had a good reason.
And he's responsible for it, and he's suddenly his whole... I mean, realize that the one panel where he's got tears on his face, and it's subtle, and we don't have to watch him blubbering, because it's one panel. But it's because not only has his uncle died, but because he feels responsible. He says it's my fault. By the way, we should make that. We should start getting alcohol while we do the show, Dan, and we'll make a drinking game out of every time Peter Parker says it's my fault. And he and like his whole world is crumbled down in every conceivable way. Not just because his uncle is dead and because he's responsible, but because that changes his whole worldview, his whole outlook, the whole way he's been reinventing himself. Now he's got to start all over. He would not be able to articulate all the things that I'm saying, even though he's talking and articulating things, but he's not saying all the things that I'm saying right now in that panel. You see what I mean? So I'm going to give that a pat. And also, I'm not saying characters can never cry in a thing, but you're exacerbating the problem when you have what seems like a somewhat not proactive enough character with Peter Parker in the Raimi movies, and that was, or at least in the first one. And so, anyway, that's...
Yeah, and I love the last panel here. It's really small, and it has that narration, which I think is just as fitting, where it's talking about a lone, silent figure fading into the gathering darkness. Peter Parker is in the same exact place that he was at the beginning of the story after all this happened.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
He didn't gain anything from any of the selfish acts that he he went about in the story. It's very fitting and a great bookend to the story, I think.
Yeah, it's bookended, and it's not at all what you would expect. This being the first book, once again, get your mind out of all the Spider-Man you've ever looked at, and think about what it would be like reading this without anything more. That is a wrist-slitting kind of ending, right? Like,
it is,
like this is not a story about a superhero at all. He's not a superhero. Yeah, this is not, and I think it's funny that the beginning of the book has to tell you that it's a superhero book, because it isn't.
Yeah,
it's not a superhero story.
He's kind of an underwear character. He doesn't fight any villains. There's no like grand adventure that he goes on.
Not yet.
He's just a kid that has a really sad time.
Yeah. Well, and what's cool? I didn't think about this. It's almost an O. Henry kind of ending, and it fits the Amazing Fantasy model. I never thought of that before.
That's true.
But it is, they were telling Twilight Zone-ish kinds of stories. Yes, he puts on a costume. Yes, it's a superhero-looking thing because Stan Lee envisioned it that way and wants to eventually go that way with it. But thinking about it just as one of the last stories in the Amazing Fantasy book, this is still fitting that kind of pseudo horror pulp thing a little bit. You got a guy that gets bit by a spider, and he turns into a creature, and like he's not visually any different, but it changes him physically and mentally, and it makes him start to go on a dark path, and he ruins his life because of it. This is more of the kind of story you would tell in Amazing Fantasy than it is a superhero story, and I've never thought of that before. That's so cool.
I didn't frame it like a Twilight Zone episode, but I think you're absolutely right. That's awesome. Yeah.
I never would have thought
I see this as a Twilight Zone episode with like it being cast in black and white and stuff. I can totally picture that.
Dan, I've never thought to think of it by itself. I always think of it as the origin for a story, for a character that's had a million stories. If you can take yourself out of that and try to think of it as this just being a standalone story, I think it works.
I think so too. I mean, like I always say that like this is one of the best Spider-Man stories, and a lot of people sort of resisted them doing the origin again when they rebooted it the first time. And I always said, I don't know how you do Spider-Man without the origin, because that's one of the best stories. You want to see that adapted in an interesting way.
I think the reason people don't is because they feel like they've read it and seen it a million times, and it has been, I think, re-shown and repackaged in the comics way too many times. I mean, just over and over and over and over and over again. And honestly, when is it ever different enough that we really need that? Like all you gotta do is, if it's really important, just put this in as a backup feature in the back of an issue. Like you don't really need to keep repackaging it and redoing it necessarily. I mean, there have been some different versions of it. I'm not saying that there's never been anything added to it or whatever. Sometimes too much, as you were saying earlier. But I'm just saying that I think a lot of that comes from, even on screen, people feeling like they've seen it in the cartoon shows and stuff. We've seen it too many times. I mean, like Spectacular managed to not do a whole episode about it.
Yeah, there was just flashbacks and stuff like that, and it worked really well on that show. That's true.
And so I think they can do that in the movies. I think they need to not gloss over it and make sure that in the first movie, if not in Civil War, we know very much what the origin is. I mean, it's important to know if they've changed it at all. We need to know that. But anyway.
I mean, I'm not saying it's a strict rule, like you must do it if you do a Spider-Man film series or animated series or whatever. I'm just saying that, like, I don't resist it because it's one of my favorite stories with the character. I feel like a lot of people don't look at it as a story that has any sort of weight or something to say, about the character. It's just sort of an impetus to get the ball rolling. And I don't see it that way. Well, that's why I like seeing it. So, like, when they readapt it and they put an interesting spin on it, like, that's fine with me because I like the story.
I feel like I didn't have enough of an appreciation for this story for the longest time, and surprisingly, what I needed before I appreciated that there really is a story in the origin of Spider-Man, and we kind of like we can tell a story with that, was amazing. And that's one of the reasons I think that I like that movie more than a lot of people do, is that I never appreciated the idea that Peter Parker, this is the difference, that Peter Parker has to learn the lesson with great power comes with great responsibility on his own, the hard way. That a lot of people think of it just as a credo. Oh, your uncle told you this, and this is what you live by. No, he didn't before that. And importantly, his uncle was telling him that before he got powers. That's a weird thing to tell somebody without superpowers, but whatever. I don't think
in this issue, Uncle Ben never says it to him.
I thought that it was mentioned somewhere in the issue that he used to say that or something.
He never says it directly.
No, he doesn't. No.
It's sort of like, statement of the creed is this panel right here at the end of the story that it's bookended with.
Yeah, I thought it said it earlier, but maybe it didn't.
I don't think so, but I mean, maybe I'll go back and look and see.
Yeah,
it's been a while since I've looked over it, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I'll open it and gloss through this again real quick because I thought I saw it before. Maybe not. I could be wrong. But what I was going to say is, I think a lot of people used to seeing origins for superhero characters that they're already familiar with and they already know.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have.
I think the problem, like, people don't view this story as different from a lot of the other stories, which are just like, we got to get the ball rolling.
I think you're right. I don't think it does show up anywhere before that. I think you're right.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, that's interesting. That it doesn't come directly from. Well, honestly, it makes more sense if it doesn't.
Yeah, I think it gives credence to your point where, like, it's not just a platitude that Uncle Ben says that Peter Parker, repeats to himself and doesn't really understand until the end of the story.
Yeah. It's
what the theme of the story is, and Stan Lee kind of spells it out for you at the end.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is, I think growing up, I was so used to, like, because obviously that would be reprinted sometimes, and I had a, reprint. I probably have 3 or 4 reprints of that. It was reprinted so many times that I don't think I ever looked at it as closely as you did and ever really appreciated it because reading Spider-Man books and watching the TV show and stuff, the cartoon show, I was hit over the head with the origin that it never occurred to me to read it as a story. That it never seemed like a story. It always felt like just a setup thing. And sitting here and dissecting it like this, I'm appreciating it more than I ever have before. I mean, it does stand alone. I never thought of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about. This was supposed to be like the only story they were going to get to do with this character, and it was only 12 pages. The fact that they used their page count this effectively and the story was that great, it's no wonder why it caught on and resonated with so many people.
I have no sympathy for writers that say that you can't write a good story in 22 pages.
Yeah, I don't either.
These guys did it in 12. And isn't it also important to note, and I think that Stan Lee does, even for the conventions of the time, get too wordy in places. I think sometimes he talks sometimes about how, you've got to gum it up with words. I think that Stan Lee having, as you were saying earlier, having somebody else really plot the book for him and feeling like he's got to look like he's added more, like he's not doing his job if he's not putting words everywhere. What I love about this is that the narration boxes, for the most part, are just there to say things like, meanwhile, and then occasionally it feels the need to, give you some actual narration. But it's not telling you all the stuff you're looking at already. There actually is story being told in the action in a book this early. You go to early 90s books sometimes, and you're reading these lengthy narration boxes that are telling you exactly what you're looking at. I mean, as much as I love Simonson's Thor, half the time I found myself skipping past narration boxes because I'm, well, yeah, I see the guy kicking the guy. What do you need to tell me that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Stan Lee, obviously, like you said, he talked a lot about how he would try to put in a lot of words to get kids to look things up and expand their vocabulary, and I think that's why he would put like wacky monikers in front of a lot of the Marvel bullpen writers when he would credit them and things like that too.
Yeah. And
you'll get a little bit more of that kind of narrating over the action stuff later on in this run. There's a little bit of that going on. I'm not going to deny that it's not there when we get to it.
I was surprised by how there was none in this.
Yeah, and I think it's telling that most of this story is just kind of human drama because all of the story is told through the facial expressions of the characters and what the dialogue is. You don't really need to narrate. You don't need to be like, have a narration saying Peter Parker looks angrily at the cop because you can tell that.
There he is, and he's angry with the cop.
Yeah, with a lot of like punch 'em up action stuff, I feel like Stanley was trying to fill in the gaps with people for their imagination. Like if Spider-Man's like flinging at someone off a wall, and it just looks like, you know, the way the panels are drawn, Spider-Man's sort of suspended in midair about to hit a guy, he'd be like, oh, Spider-Man leapt off the wall and like leaped at the guy or whatever, so that you have that mental picture so you can imagine the action happening as it would in real life, but you don't really need any of that here. In the way that Ditko draws a lot of the action here, like I said before, the streak of Spider-Man coming off the wall, he makes it pretty evident that what's happening with the still images. So it's really good stuff. It's a really well crafted of the medium comic book as well. It's really awesome.
Well, Dan, I can't believe we got a full hour, more than an hour.
Yeah, thanks for sitting down with me and talking about it. I hope you enjoyed looking at it again.
Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from you, as I always do, and got a lot out of the experience going back and looking at it again. Dan, I am so excited to go fine-tooth comb issue to issue through this with you. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Me too, especially the first appearances of some of the villains, because a lot of them, you know, some of their best stories are their first ones. Like, I think, other than what Kevin Smith did with Mysterio in his Daredevil run, the best Mysterio story is like the first or second time he shows up. There's great stuff done with Mysterio in this run and some of the other villains. So and there's a new one every issue, as Stan Lee likes to promote himself as you know, a creator of a new villain every issue, that kind of guy.
Yeah, how far do you go before there's a repeat?
I don't know off the top of my head, but, you know, villains do recur. But for a while, it's just kind of like, you know, here's the Enforcers, here's Green Goblin, here's...
Well, and he used the same model for Daredevil, if you remember.
Yes, that's true, yeah. He does that for a lot of the early Marvel stuff. But, then it gets a little bit more recurring after they kind of hit their stride and stuff, so...
Well, everybody, thanks a lot for watching. We sure appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed our panel-for-panel conversation and commentary about Amazing Fantasy 15. Dan and I are going to be with you again, hopefully next week, with Amazing Spider-Man #1. Is obviously the next place to go, and we're going to keep doing it in this format. And we're gonna allow them to be as long as they need to be. I don't expect an hour every time, but
yeah, I don't think so either. I think, you know, this being one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told, we took a little bit more time with it, and
there was some overview stuff. I think there's a lot of like generalized stuff that we brought up here that's not going to have to come up every time we do one of these.
Yeah, especially movie stuff. Like, not every issue has something that was adapted in the movies. I mean, there'll be little things, but yeah, we won't have to spend nearly as much time on some of that stuff.
Thanks for watching, folks. We'll see you again next time. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
See you later.